Claire sat stiffly on the edge of the couch, hands folded in her lap, as Margaret's sharp voice filled the living room. "You don't know how to cook a proper meal," Margaret said, waving a hand toward the untouched casserole on the table. "And don't get me started on the laundry. Who folds towels like that? They look like rags in the cupboard." Claire bit the inside of her cheek. She had heard these comments before, about her cooking, her job, even about the way she walked into a room. Tonight, though, something felt heavier. Daniel, her husband, sat quietly in the armchair, staring at the floor. "You know, Claire," Margaret continued, "if you actually worked a better job, maybe we wouldn't be living like this." The words hit Claire like a slap. She worked full-time to pay most of the bills while Daniel was still searching for work. She wanted to defend herself, but before she could speak, Margaret's voice rose to a shout. "That's it. Pack your things and get out of my house." Today, the room fell silent. Daniel opened his mouth as if to say something, then shut it again. No one moved. Claire's face burned, but she didn't cry. She didn't argue. She simply stood up, nodded once, and walked upstairs. Her steps were slow but steady as she reached the small bedroom she shared with Daniel. She opened the closet, pulled out her suitcase, and began to pack. Each folded shirt, each pair of shoes went into the bag carefully. She didn't slam drawers. She didn't throw anything. She just worked in silence, her heart pounding. Downstairs, she could still hear faint voices, Margaret muttering, Daniel sighing, but she blocked them out. When the last zipper slid shut, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. A notification from her bank lit up the screen. A reminder that the monthly payment for the electricity bill would be deducted tomorrow. Claire stared at the screen for a long moment. Then slowly, a new thought formed in her mind. If they didn't want her here, why should she keep paying their bills? Her chest felt lighter than it had in weeks. She picked up her suitcase, ready to walk out. Not just from this house, but from the part of her life where she stayed quiet to keep the peace. This time, she wasn't leaving empty-handed. She was leaving with a decision. She grew up modestly, in a small house with parents who worked hard to provide for her. Claire was not spoiled. She learned early that if she wanted something, she had to earn it. She studied well, got a decent job, and always dreamed of one day having a home full of warmth and love, a place where she and her future family could feel safe. When she met Daniel, she thought she had found that dream. Daniel was kind, gentle, and funny. He made her laugh and listened to her worries. He wasn't rich, but that didn't matter to Claire. She believed love was enough. They got married in a simple ceremony, surrounded by friends and family. Claire thought it was the start of a beautiful new life. But life had other plans. A few months after their wedding, Daniel lost his job. His mother, Margaret, offered them a solution. Move back home. It will save money while Daniel gets back on his feet. At first, it seemed like a blessing. Claire thought it would only be for a short while, just until Daniel found work again. She put most of her salary into paying the family's bills, electricity, water, internet, even some of the groceries. She wanted to help. After all, they were family now. But living under Margaret's roof was nothing like Claire had imagined. Margaret had an opinion about everything Claire did, how she cooked, how she dressed, even how she spoke to Daniel. "You shouldn't work so much. A real wife stays home," Margaret would say one day. The next day she'd sigh and say, "If you made more money, maybe Daniel wouldn't feel so stressed." No matter what Claire did, it was never right. Because the utility accounts were in Claire's name, Margaret accused her of acting like the man of the house and trying to control everyone. "Who pays for what is none of your business?" Margaret snapped once when Claire reminded her that the bills were due. Daniel sat quietly during these fights. He loved Claire, but he didn't like to argue with his mother. He would squeeze Claire's hand under the table, silently asking her to let it go. At night, Claire would lie awake staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of it all pressing on her chest. She loved Daniel, truly, but she couldn't understand why he wouldn't speak up for her. Every time he stayed silent, it felt like a small betrayal. She worked hard all day, paid most of the bills, and still came home to a house where she felt unwanted. She was treated like a guest, or worse, like a problem to be dealt with. Sometimes she thought about leaving, getting a small apartment of her own, even if it was tiny. But every time she pictured it, she thought of Daniel. She didn't want to abandon him. She wanted their marriage to work. So she stayed, swallowing the hurt, hoping things would get better. But deep inside, a small fire had started to burn, a quiet anger that grew every time Margaret spoke down to her. Claire was kind, yes, but she was not weak, and one day, she knew she wouldn't be able to stay quiet anymore. A small argument escalates when Claire suggests boundaries about finances. It started simply. She reminded Daniel and Margaret that the bills were getting higher, and maybe everyone should agree on a budget. "We can't keep leaving all the lights on all night," Claire said gently. "And maybe we should take turns buying groceries. It would be fair for everyone." Margaret's face tightened. "Fair for everyone? Are you saying I don't do enough in my own house?" "That's not what I meant," Claire said quickly, trying to stay calm. "I just think we should plan things together. It would take some of the pressure off." But Margaret wasn't listening anymore. Her voice grew sharp. "You think because your name is on the bills, you get to tell us how to live? You're acting like the man of the house." Claire felt her stomach twist. Daniel sat quietly, looking between them, but said nothing. The argument ended with Margaret storming out of the kitchen, muttering about disrespect. That night, there was a family dinner. Margaret's brother and sister-in-law came over, along with a few cousins. Everyone sat around the long table, passing plates and making small talk. Claire tried to stay quiet, hoping to avoid any more conflict, but Margaret was still angry. Halfway through dinner, she put her fork down with a loud clatter. "You know what I can't stand?" Margaret said loudly so everyone could hear. "A woman who thinks paying a few bills makes her the boss. Claire walks around like she owns this house, but she's not even a real wife. A real wife knows her place." The table went silent. All eyes turned to Claire. Her face burned hot, but she didn't say anything. She waited, hoping Daniel would speak up for her. But Daniel just stared at his plate, saying nothing. Margaret leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "If you don't like how I run my house, then pack your things and get out. Today." The words hung in the air like a slap. Claire felt her chest tighten, but her hands stayed steady. She stood up slowly, nodding once. "Okay," she said softly. Without another word, she left the table, climbed the stairs, and went to the bedroom. She pulled out her suitcase again and started packing. Her movements were slow and calm. There were no tears this time. When her last bag was zipped, she glanced at her phone. A notification from the bank appeared, reminding her that the electricity bill would be paid the next day, from her account. She stared at the screen for a moment, then opened her banking app. Her fingers didn't shake as she canceled every automatic payment. Electricity, water, internet. All of it. A strange calm washed over her. This was not revenge. This was simply letting go. If they didn't want her here, then she was done carrying the weight of this house. She picked up her bags, walked downstairs past the silent dinner table, and headed for the door. No one stopped her. Not even Daniel. For the first time in months, Claire felt something that almost felt like freedom. Days later, the family started facing the consequences. It began with the lights. One evening, Margaret flipped the switch in the kitchen, and nothing happened. The house was dark. "What is wrong with the power?" she shouted. Daniel checked the fuse box but knew it wasn't that. The electricity had been cut off. By the next morning, the internet stopped working too. The water followed 2 days later. Margaret was furious. "This is your fault," she yelled at Daniel. "You let that girl control everything. Now look at us, sitting in the dark like beggars." Daniel stayed quiet. He felt guilty, but he didn't know how to fix it. The bills had always been in Claire's name. He tried calling Claire, but she didn't answer. He sent messages asking if she could at least pay for the electricity until he figured things out. Still no reply. Outside, the neighbors started to notice. People whispered when they passed the house, wondering why Margaret's home, usually so well kept, was suddenly dark every night. Margaret held her head high in public, but inside, she was panicking. She told neighbors that Claire was vengeful and had shut everything off just to be cruel. But when she was alone, Margaret sat at the kitchen table, staring at the empty fridge, feeling embarrassed. She had told Claire to leave in front of everyone, and now she was paying for it. Meanwhile, Claire's life was slowly beginning to change. She rented a small apartment with white walls and a little balcony. It wasn't fancy, but it was hers. She called her best friend Mia, who she hadn't seen in months. They met for coffee, and Claire felt lighter just talking to someone who didn't make her feel small. At work, she started staying late, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. She was focused, determined to save money and build a new life. In the quiet of her apartment, she sat on the floor with takeout boxes and her laptop, making plans. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was walking on eggshells. A week later, there was a knock on her door. Claire hesitated before opening it. It was Daniel. He looked tired, his shirt wrinkled, dark circles under his eyes. "Claire, please," he said. "Can we talk?" She stepped aside and let him in. He sat on the edge of the couch, twisting his hands together. "I should have stood up for you," he said quietly. "I know I should have said something that night. I didn't want to make things worse." Claire crossed her arms. "You think letting her humiliate me in front of everyone made things better?" Daniel's shoulders dropped. "No. It made everything worse. But canceling the bills, that was too much. We've been sitting in the dark for days." Claire took a deep breath. "Daniel, I didn't walk away. I was pushed. She told me to leave, in front of the whole family. And you let her. Why should I keep paying for a house where I'm not welcome?" He didn't have an answer. "I just want us to go back to normal," he said finally. "I want you to come home." Claire shook her head. "That house was never my home. Not with her there. If you want to be with me, then we build something separate, away from her control." Daniel stared at the floor, silent. He knew she was right, but choosing her meant letting go of his mother's hold over him, something he had never dared to do. When he finally stood to leave, Claire didn't stop him. She felt sad, but also strangely strong. For once, she was standing up for herself, and she wasn't backing down. Utilities piled up unpaid. The electricity had been off for nearly 2 weeks, and now the water company had sent a final notice. Margaret sat at the kitchen table, flipping through the overdue bills with shaking hands. "This is ridiculous," she shouted, slamming the papers down. "We can't live like this." Daniel sat across from her, staring at his hands. He was exhausted, from the heat, from the constant tension, from missing Claire. Margaret's voice cut through the silence like a knife. "This is your fault, Daniel. You let that girl run things. You let her humiliate me, and now look at us. Useless. That's what you are." Something in Daniel finally broke. "Enough," he shouted, standing so fast his chair scraped across the floor. Margaret froze, shocked. "You want to talk about useless?" Daniel said, his voice shaking with anger. "Claire was the only reason this house was running. She paid the bills. She bought the groceries. She kept this place together while I was out of work, and you treated her like dirt." Margaret blinked. She paid for everything?" "Yes," Daniel yelled. "You think the lights stayed on by magic? You think the internet was free? It was Claire. She carried all of us, and you threw her out like trash." Margaret's face paled. She sank back into her chair, silent for once. Daniel grabbed his keys and left the house without another word. He needed air. He needed space. He needed Claire. That evening, there was a knock at Claire's apartment door. When she opened it, Margaret was standing there. Claire didn't move aside. "What do you want?" she asked calmly. Margaret's eyes darted around the hallway as if worried someone would see her. "I came to talk. We need the bills back in your name. This is getting out of hand." Claire crossed her arms. "No, Margaret. I won't do that." Margaret's voice rose. "You can't just leave us without power. You're being selfish." Claire stayed calm. "Respect isn't something you demand after throwing someone away. You told me to pack my things and I did. That includes my money." For a moment, Margaret had no words. She had never seen Claire like this, steady, confident, completely unmoved. Behind her, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Daniel appeared, carrying a duffel bag. Margaret turned to him, startled. "What are you doing?" Daniel adjusted the bag on his shoulder. "I'm moving out." Margaret's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came. "I love you, Mom," Daniel said. "But I can't keep living like this. Claire is my wife. I should have chosen her before. I'm choosing her now." He stepped past Margaret and into the apartment. Margaret stood frozen for a long moment before slowly walking away. Inside, Daniel set his bag down and looked at Claire. "I should have done this a long time ago," he said softly. "If you'll let me, I want to start over. Just us. No more living under her control." Claire looked at him for a long moment. She saw the sincerity in his tired eyes, and for the first time she believed him. She accepts Daniel back but on her terms. Therapy, financial independence, and no moving back with his mother. If we do this, Claire said, standing in her small kitchen, we do it differently. We go to therapy. We make our own home, our own rules. And we never live under your mother's roof again. Daniel nodded quickly. I agree. I'll do whatever it takes. Claire looked at him closely, searching for doubt, but saw none. And we split the bills evenly, she added. I won't carry everything on my own anymore. You won't have to, Daniel said softly. I got a new job. I start Monday. For the first time in months, Claire smiled, a small but real smile. Meanwhile, Margaret's house grew quiet. The kitchen that had always been full of voices now echoed with silence. The bills kept arriving, and this time there was no one to pay them. She sat at the table night after night, staring at the numbers, slowly realizing what she had done. She had pushed her son away. She had driven out the one person who kept the house running. One afternoon, Margaret picked up the phone and almost called Claire, but stopped. She didn't know what to say that would undo the damage. Back in her apartment, Claire was slowly rebuilding her life. She decorated the space with soft curtains and plants on the windowsill. She felt lighter waking up in a place where no one criticized her for how she made coffee or folded towels. She started focusing more on her career, taking on new projects and even earning a promotion at work. Her boss noticed how dedicated she was, and for once Claire felt proud of herself without needing anyone's approval. Daniel went to therapy with her every week. At first, it was hard, sitting in that room, saying things out loud they had both avoided for months. But slowly, something shifted. Daniel began to speak up more, to set boundaries, to see how much pressure Claire had been under. One evening, after therapy, he turned to her in the car. I'm sorry I didn't protect you. I won't let it happen again. Claire reached for his hand. I believe you, she said. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. And that was enough for now. One evening, Claire sat in her new apartment, a warm cup of tea in her hands. The soft glow of a single lamp lit the room. Daniel was on the floor, opening another box and carefully placing books on the shelf. The apartment was still half empty, but it felt different. It felt peaceful. No one was shouting from the kitchen. No one was criticizing how she sat, spoke, or worked. It was quiet, but not a heavy silence, a safe, calm silence. Claire leaned back on the couch and let out a deep breath. For the first time in months, she felt like she could breathe freely. Her phone buzzed on the table. She picked it up and saw the message. Margaret, I'm sorry. Claire stared at the screen for a moment. The words were short, almost hesitant, but they carried the weight of everything that had happened. She could have replied. She could have written back something angry or forgiving. But instead, she set the phone back down without typing a single word. Daniel looked over at her. Everything okay? He asked gently. Claire nodded. Yes, she said, and she meant it. She watched Daniel as he continued unpacking, smiling softly. She didn't need to fight anymore, didn't need to explain herself, didn't need to beg anyone to see her worth. The apartment was small, the future still uncertain, but this moment was hers. Sometimes, Claire thought, the loudest kind of freedom isn't shouting or slamming doors. It's the quiet that comes after you stop explaining yourself. And in that quiet, Claire finally felt free. Hi friends. Yellowheart, thanks for watching till the very end. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this. See you next time. Waving hand.